Let me show you the outside of Buckingham Palace, where the flag is lowered as it's been announced that the Duchess of Kent, the cousin of Queen Elizabeth.
The announcement came first from Buckingham Palace. Solemn, measured, steeped in tradition. The Duchess of Kent had passed away, age 92, surrounded by family, remembered as a dignified figure who, for decades, carried herself with grace. At Wimbledon finals and royal gatherings alike, the sort of woman whose presence symbolized the quiet endurance of the House of Windsor, and as the Union flag lowered outside the palace gates, Britain settled into mourning. Yet, behind the scenes of grief and ceremony, a very different drama was brewing. One not about remembrance but about resentment, because in California and then in Britain, Prince Harry was reportedly fuming, pacing, ranting, and, as sources say, going nuts, after learning that the condolence email he had sent to the Duke of Kent, the widower now drowning in grief, had gone entirely unanswered. Not a word, not even a courtesy acknowledgement, and for Harry, a man who has built his entire post-royal existence on being heard, validated, and seen, that silence was deafening, an insult, a humiliation, a reminder that within the institution he abandoned, he no longer commands the automatic respect he still craves. And here is where the gossip explodes, because while most people in mourning quietly accept condolences without feeling obliged to personally respond, Harry, in his typical fashion, reportedly expected not just a polite nod, but a personal acknowledgement, perhaps even warmth, a line that reassured him he was still part of the fold. But instead, what he got was nothing. The royal equivalent of a slammed door, and of course, the irony is delicious, isn't it? Because this is Harry, the same Harry who has dragged the monarchy through the mud on Netflix, in Oprah's Garden, in Spare, on endless podcasts. A man who has aired every grievance he could monetize, and yet in this moment of death and grief, he apparently believed the Duke of Kent owed him a personal note of gratitude. And when that didn't come, insiders say his temper boiled over. He raged to confidants that he had been disrespected, ignored, frozen out once again by the icy apparatus of Buckingham Palace. But let's pause here, because I want you to ask yourself, is this genuine pain from a son of the House of Windsor trying to reconnect? Or is it more of the same? Entitlement. Dressed up as empathy, Harry's obsession with recognition disguised as compassion. What do you think? Was the Duke of Kent right to keep his silence? Or should he have acknowledged Harry's email? Drop your take in the comments, because this is where royal dignity and Sussex drama clash like oil and water, and let's not forget, the Duke of Kent is no tabloid-hungry celebrity. He's 90 years old, private, old school, a man who has survived the Second World War, era of stiff upper lip aristocracy. He has buried friends. He has stood in the shadows of monarchs and in the hierarchy of grief. The last thing on his mind would be rushing to soothe Harry's ego. Yet Harry reportedly couldn't see that. He saw only insult, only dismissal, and the gossip mills tell us he went nuts, raising his voice, snapping at aides, complaining to Meghan in long transatlantic calls, muttering about deliberate snubs and conspiracies of silence, as though the widowed Duke had orchestrated a personal vendetta against him in the middle of mourning his wife. And this is where the public split comes in, because on social media, voices clashed, some defending Harry, insisting that no condolence should be ignored, that grief doesn't excuse rudeness, while others mocked him mercilessly, saying, "Can you believe this? Even in death, Harry finds a way to make it about himself. The Duchess of Kent has died. The family is grieving. And here he is stamping his feet about a snubbed email. Which side are you on? Do you sympathize with Harry's need for acknowledgement? Or do you think he's proving once again that he cannot navigate the quiet dignity of royal life? Weigh in, because every comment tells us which way public sympathy is swinging. And here's the cutting truth. Harry is fast becoming the man who cried snub. Every small oversight, every silence, every pause is blown up into personal humiliation. And while the tabloids feast, the palace shrugs. Insiders say courtiers rolled their eyes when they heard of his fury. one muttering, "He's turned condolences into drama. How very Sussex." And honestly, can you blame them? This is the same Harry who has turned private text messages with William into public scandal, who has mocked his stepmother, who has accused his father of cruelty, and yet he expected the Duke of Kent, an elderly man grieving his wife of more than half a century, to dash off a thank you note. If you think that's absurd, smash that like button, because the contrast could not be more brutal on one side. Grief and silence on the other, Harry's indignation spilling into the press. And, oh, the timing, my friends, could not be worse, because this comes after a string of humiliations. Charles rejecting his request to bring Archie and Lilibet into Buckingham Palace, William refusing to meet him during his last UK visit, his Netflix deals hanging by a thread, his public image collapsing under the weight of constant complaining. So this email snub landed not as an isolated oversight, but as another nail in the coffin of Harry's royal relevance. Each silence from the palace echoing louder than any words, telling the world in subtle tones, "You chose to leave. You chose. Exile, you cannot demand intimacy now. And let's remember, the Duke of Kent himself is no villain. He is reserved, shy, a man who never courted headlines. His silence may not even have been deliberate. Perhaps he never saw Harry's email. Perhaps he chose to let protocol handle it. Perhaps he considered the official palace announcement sufficient. But in gossip, perception is everything. And Harry perceives slights everywhere, so his fury now becomes the story. Headlines blasting Harry livid over ignored condolence, tabloids laughing at the absurdity of it all, Twitter mocking with memes of unread emails, and spam folders. Can you imagine the humiliation? And here's where the gossip turns deliciously cruel, because some whisper Meghan saw this coming and deliberately stayed out of it, letting Harry fume alone, her silence as calculated as always. Maybe she'll spin this into another victim narrative later. Maybe she'll hold it back as ammunition for the next podcast or docuseries, but for now, she stays quiet, leaving Harry to burn, and the optics are devastating. A husband raging about being ignored, a wife quietly distancing, a family mourning, and a monarchy unmoved. And the longer the silence stretches, the clearer the message becomes. Harry is on the outside, banging on the gates, desperate to be heard, while inside, the royals carry on with grief, dignity, and unity. So tell me, do you think the Duke of Kent's silence was deliberate, a subtle act of royal revenge, or do you think Harry is simply blowing nothing into scandal? Comment below, because the answer shapes whether Harry looks like the wronged son or the entitled outcast. And honestly, isn't it telling that even in the death of a duchess, the story isn't about her life, her legacy, her decades of service, but about Harry's reaction, his rage, his ego, once again making himself the headline. And that, more than the ignored email, is the true scandal. Because every time the House of Windsor grieves, Harry manages to turn the spotlight back onto himself. A desperate craving for relevance that grows more tragic with each passing year. And now, the gossip presses on, asking the question nobody dares say aloud in palace corridors. Is Harry so addicted to attention that even condolences must be acknowledged or else they become insults? Is he so hungry for validation that silence feels like betrayal? Or is this just another example of how far he has drifted from the quiet? Stoic codes of royal life. Think about it, weigh it, and let your voice be heard in the comments, because history is being written not just by what the palace does, but by how the public perceives these endless Sussex scandals. And if you think Harry has finally crossed into self-parody, hit that subscribe button, because this saga is far from over. The snub may seem small, but in the court of royal gossip, it is dynamite. And as Harry fumes, as the Duke of Kent remains silent, and as Meghan bides her time, the story stretches on. The silence louder than any scandal. The snub more humiliating than any insult, leaving Harry once again on the losing side of royal history, furious, isolated, mocked, and increasingly irrelevant. and the world, my friends, cannot look away. Look away. Prince Harry's relationship with the wider royal family has long been the subject of analysis, speculation, and intense public scrutiny. Within this complex and often tense dynamic, the Duke of Kent occupies a unique position. He is not one of the most visible or outspoken figures within the royal household, yet his role has always been marked by discretion, steadiness, and an understanding of the traditional protocols that underpin royal life. The Duke's reputation rests upon quiet service, an avoidance of controversy, and a manner of conducting himself that reflects continuity rather than confrontation. Against this backdrop, the tension that has recently emerged between Harry and the Duke of Kent is notable not because it is loud or public on the Duke's part, but precisely because it is defined by silence. The silence in question concerns unanswered communication, a private matter that has been magnified into a public narrative through media exposure and interpretation. Prince Harry, already in a heightened emotional state after repeated disputes and public controversies, sought acknowledgement from the Duke of Kent. According to accounts, he sent follow-up messages when his initial outreach was met with no reply. This lack of response quickly escalated in Harry's perception into something larger than a mere missed message. It became, for him, symbolic of rejection and disregard. In a family where protocol and discretion govern relationships, Harry's insistence on immediacy and recognition sits uneasily. Royal insiders have described the atmosphere around this incident as tense, almost combustible. Staffers were reported to be managing the potential fallout, not because the Duke of Kent was likely to respond in any volatile manner, but because Harry's reaction risked spilling into public view. The pattern is one that has repeated itself across other disputes in recent years. A private matter left unresolved, Harry interpreting silence as slight, and the resulting frustration amplified by media attention. Each episode builds upon the last, creating a sense that small moments are transformed into significant flashpoints. The media, unsurprisingly, has seized upon this latest dispute with enthusiasm. Headlines speak of Harry's fury, of a palace snub that he cannot tolerate, and of his inability to handle silence. In the court of public opinion, responses are split. Some observers sympathize with Harry, noting that grief, personal loss, and complex family ties often produce heightened sensitivity. From this perspective, the Duke of Kent's silence could be read not as rejection, but as adherence to protocol. Others, however, are more critical. They argue that Harry has developed a pattern of magnifying personal grievances into public spectacles, and that this has made him his own worst enemy. What makes this episode particularly striking is the contrast in conduct between the two figures at its center. The Duke of Kent, long respected for his quiet diplomacy, embodies the traditional royal approach of restraint. His silence can be interpreted as consistent with his character and his role within the institution. Prince Harry, on the other hand, has increasingly adopted a stance where silence feels intolerable, where acknowledgement must be immediate, and where personal validation is sought directly. This clash is less about the content of communication and more about the meaning ascribed to its absence. Analysts suggest that Harry's frustration reveals not only personal sensitivity, but also an unresolved conflict with the institution he left behind. Though he has distanced himself from formal royal duties, his expectation of recognition and validation remains strong. Every unanswered message thus becomes more than a private slight. It becomes a reminder of his detachment from the system he once served. The Duke of Kent's silence in this interpretation is not an isolated gesture, but a symbolic reinforcement of the boundaries Harry continues to test. Inside Buckingham Palace, the incident was reportedly regarded with caution. Courtiers, familiar with Harry's intensity, anticipated the possibility that his dissatisfaction might become public, creating another cycle of headlines and commentary. One insider remarked that Harry does not merely want acknowledgement but seeks validation, and when this is not forthcoming, his reaction tends to escalate. Within a family that places a premium on composure and discretion, such a dynamic can be both frustrating and exhausting. Public opinion has intensified around this pattern. On one side, there are those who see Harry's efforts to maintain communication with family members as genuine, even admirable, especially given the personal loss he has endured. On the other, critics argue that his focus on minor slights makes him appear self-centered and entitled. The Duke of Kent's silence in this light is viewed as a form of discipline, a refusal to indulge behavior that transforms private matters into public controversies. For Harry, however, silence functions differently. Accustomed to the immediacy of media coverage and the responsiveness of modern celebrity culture, he interprets the absence of a reply as a personal rejection. The gap between these two interpretations, silence as discretion versus silence as slight, lies at the heart of the conflict. It highlights a broader clash between the values of traditional royalty and those of contemporary celebrity. The incident has reverberated across social media, where debates over Harry's reaction have been fierce. Some users highlight the broader pressures he faces, arguing that any attempt at reconciliation should be met with understanding rather than silence. Others counter that Harry has created his own difficulties by repeatedly publicizing private disputes. Memes, commentaries, and viral posts have transformed the episode into a spectacle, further amplifying what might otherwise have remained a minor matter. Observers note that Meghan Markle, though not directly involved in this particular exchange, may still influence the broader context. Harry's heightened sensitivity to perceived slights is often linked to the scrutiny and criticism both he and Meghan have endured. Every silence, every unanswered message becomes magnified by a history of conflict with the institution and the media. The Duke of Kent's silence, therefore, is not interpreted in isolation, but against a backdrop of accumulated grievances and perceived exclusions. Legal analysts and royal commentators have suggested that even incidents of this scale can have long-term repercussions in an environment where perception shapes influence. Every publicized dispute contributes to an evolving narrative. For Harry, each moment of outrage, however small in origin, reinforces an image of volatility and hypersensitivity. For the Duke of Kent, each moment of silence reinforces his reputation for discretion and restraint. This contrast underscores the impossibility of reconciliation without a change in approach. Harry continues to seek recognition on terms that conflict with royal protocol, while the Duke of Kent embodies an adherence to tradition that leaves little room for such expectations. Unless Harry adjusts his perception of silence, incidents like this will continue to occur, further straining relationships and fueling public fascination. The symbolic power of silence should not be underestimated. In the context of the royal family, silence often serves as a form of communication. In itself, it preserves dignity, avoids escalation, and reflects the institution's long-standing preference for discretion over confrontation. For Harry, however, silence creates a vacuum that is quickly filled by frustration and public speculation. The Duke of Kent's refusal to respond thus becomes not just a personal choice, but a reminder of the boundaries Harry struggles to respect. As analysts have pointed out, this is not the first time Harry has struggled with the meaning of silence. From interviews that break long-standing traditions of confidentiality to legal actions that bring private disputes into the public domain, his approach consistently seeks expression rather than restraint. The Duke of Kent's stance, by contrast, reflects a lifetime of experience in managing sensitive situations without recourse to public airing. The unfolding drama highlights the ongoing tension between modernity and tradition within the royal family. Harry represents a generation shaped by immediacy, transparency, and the validation of public opinion. The Duke of Kent represents continuity, restraint, and the belief that silence itself can be powerful. This divergence creates a clash that resonates far beyond the specifics of one unanswered message. The situation is further complicated by the media's role. Every incident is amplified, dissected, and repackaged as evidence of broader conflicts. In this cycle, Harry's sensitivity becomes part of a larger narrative of volatility, while the Duke's silence is portrayed as discipline. The public, in turn, is left to interpret these portrayals according to their own biases, reinforcing divisions rather than resolving them. In conclusion, the incident between Prince Harry and the Duke of Kent illustrates more than a personal disagreement. It reflects the broader clash between modern celebrity expectations and traditional royal conduct. Harry's reaction reveals the difficulty of reconciling his need for recognition with the institution's preference for discretion. The Duke of Kent's silence, while frustrating to Harry, is consistent with a tradition that values restraint over immediacy. This episode, like so many before it, demonstrates how even the smallest gestures can acquire immense symbolic weight within the royal context. Unless these differing expectations are reconciled, such incidents will continue to shape public perception and dominate headlines. This is Crown and Controversy, unraveling the royals, one scandal at a time. Don't forget to subscribe.